Welcome to tonight's journey, where we'll explore the strange, sometimes dark, yet profoundly real corners of history. Have you ever heard of the male courtesans of the Qing dynasty? They weren't just symbols of pleasure, but also victims of a complex society where honor, power, and the body intertwined in a tragic game. Before we begin, do me a small favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, not just to show support, but to make sure you don't miss any of our journeys together. I promise, by the end of this video, you'll see a side of history rarely told in books, but deeply worth reflecting on. Now turn off the lights, sit back comfortably, and let the soft hum of the fan carry us back through time, to where the glow of red silk lamps revealed stories forgotten for hundreds of years. Time in the brothel was not measured by the sun or the crowing of roosters, but by the number of times you had to fake a smile before unfamiliar faces. Each night, you put on a charm practiced like a sport, and each morning, you peeled it off like a mask soaked in sweat. In this place, no one asked if you were happy. They only asked if you were busy, if you had a client reserved, and if you remembered Madame Shang's instructions on how to tilt your head when you smiled. Men like you lived between two worlds, too soft to be considered men, yet without enough power to be women. You were a liminal being, a commodity that could recite poetry and pour wine. The outside world might think that male courtesans were wrapped in luxury, but in truth, those silks only covered the scars. People came to you seeking illusions, a bit of youth, a bit of poetry, and a bit of pleasant deceit, and you learned to turn every real emotion into a performance skill. By day, the brothel was as silent as an abandoned temple. Dim light filtered through red silk curtains, tracing warm lines across the worn wooden floor. You would often sit in a corner, memorizing poems no one truly understood, or listening to the offbeat sound of a pipa being practiced by another brother in the next room. Sometimes you wondered if you still had a voice of your own, because every word you spoke had been polished to fit a client's ears. "Don't be sincere," Whispering Bamboo once said. "Sincerity makes them uncomfortable." You remembered that. Here, honesty was a luxury, and silence was a survival skill. One evening, when the full moon hung over the city, you were summoned to the grand room. A wealthy merchant from the south had arrived, known for his generosity with silver and his stinginess with compassion. Madame Shang smiled, her jewel-studded hand resting on your shoulder. "Tonight, you'll learn a new lesson, a lesson in patience." The door closed, and you understood what patience meant. He talked endlessly, about rice, about taxes, about foolish students who lacked respect. You only nodded, poured wine, and smiled when needed. Every smile was a unit of currency. Every second of silence was a crack in your soul. When the night passed, you stepped into the courtyard where the lantern still flickered faintly. Whispering Bamboo sat there, playing a flute tune so sorrowful it ached. He didn't look at you, only asked softly, "Was the client kind?" You laughed, unsure whether at the question or its absurdity. Here, kindness was a word reserved for those who had choices. As for you, the moment you crossed that door, you had lost that right. Over time, you learned that every brothel had its own language. 3 light taps on the table meant the client is drunk. A faint cough behind the curtain signaled, "Don't let him touch you again." And when the pipa stopped mid-song, it wasn't because a string had broken. It was because someone had collapsed. These rules were never written down, but anyone who survived long enough understood them. Just as you understood that, in this world, the most beautiful ones died the earliest. Not from illness, but from exhaustion after pretending to live for too long. Sometimes, on nights with few clients, you were allowed onto the rooftop. From there, you could see the winding streets of the city, the golden glow of thousands of oil lamps spreading like smears of memory. You imagined your parents sitting somewhere, perhaps by a charcoal fire, telling others that their third child went to the city and is doing well. You wanted to believe that, the way a shipwrecked man believes the shore still exists beyond the fog. In a fleeting moment, you realized that the cruelest thing about the life of a male courtesan was not the shame or the loneliness, but being turned into a character in someone else's story, a decoration in a drunkard's memory, a faint verse in a nobleman's notebook. And you, no one recorded you. No one knew you ever existed. That was the greatest tragedy, oblivion. Yet even in oblivion, there was resistance. You began to rewrite, not with ink, but with memory. Each night, as the music faded, you retold yourself the story of your first day here, the woman in silk, the mule cart, your mother's eyes. You repeated it again and again until the memory became a lullaby, both painful and redemptive, because as long as you remembered, they hadn't completely taken you away. One day, rumors spread that the imperial court was planning a crackdown on brothels in the capital. Courtesans, madams, and male entertainers all whispered about it. Some were anxious, others hopeful. You didn't know which side to choose. If they truly shut this place down, where would you go? You had forgotten how to live outside. But if things continued, you would wither here like those before you. Between those two possibilities, you could only choose one thing: to keep living, at least for tonight. And as you sat before the mirror, holding a fan chipped at the edge, fixing the powder on your cheek, you suddenly smiled. Not the practiced one, but a real smile, fragile, bitter, and proud. Because in a world that saw you as a commodity, the mere fact that you still knew you were human, even for a moment, was already a victory. But belonging to someone does not mean safety. In the brothel, every privilege had a price, and that price was often paid in things that could not be measured. The boy you served might be a noble, or he might just be a braggart wearing a jade hat. Whoever he was, every compliment he gave was a string. The sweeter it was, the tighter it pulled. On the first night in your private room, you were rewarded with a bowl of chicken porridge and a blanket that didn't smell of mothballs. Luxury by this place's standards. The boy, the one everyone called the Manchu young master, smiled faintly and said you looked like a dream woven from moonlight. You didn't know whether to thank him or to worry. When the lanterns dimmed, you realized there was nothing romantic about being chosen. You were no longer a young man. You were a living ornament, a secret kept in a crimson room. In the days that followed, you no longer had to share your meals or your bed. You had new silk, new tea, even a new smile, one slightly curved, enough to seem grateful without offending anyone. But every time the young master came, you felt like an actor in a play written by someone else. He talked about poetry, about power, about his boredom with ordinary servants. You listened, nodded, and learned to mix a few drops of emotion into your gaze. It was no longer flirtation, it was survival. One evening, when he was drunk, you heard him murmur that even the emperor is lonely. You almost laughed, a boy in brocade complaining about loneliness to someone he'd bought with a pouch of silver. But you didn't laugh. You simply poured more tea and said softly, "Loneliness can be a kind of luxury, my lord. Not everyone can afford it." He looked at you as if he discovered a pet that could recite poetry. From then on, he came more often. Rumors spread faster than steam from tea. Someone like you, lowest in the hierarchy, favored by the Manchu young master, meant you were standing on the edge between power and disaster. Madame Sang said nothing, but the way her fan tapped twice against the armrest said everything. You understood. Be discreet. Don't let a client become a scandal. Don't make others feel threatened. In a brothel, jealousy was a small candle burning on the oil of one's own guts. One morning, while you were practicing a song, Red Pony approached. He smiled, but in his eyes was a storm. "Careful, little flower," he said. "The wind up high blows hard." Then he walked away, leaving you with your flute in unease. You began to realize that in this silk-draped world, everything was sugar-coated, even threats. From then on, you learned caution. When the young master asked questions, you answered lightly as smoke. When he gave gifts, you thanked him just enough. When others watched, you pretended not to notice. But one thing you couldn't hide: Madame Siang's gaze, always watching you from the upper floor through the haze of incense, as if weighing whether to invest further or cut her losses early. In the third month, a rare event occurred: the tea gathering of precious blossoms. All male courtesans were to perform before the most powerful guests. Merchants, officials, even a few in court robes. It was a chance for promotion or erasure from the roster. You were chosen to play the opening flute solo. Whispering Bamboo helped you perfect every note, every breath. He said softly, "Don't try to make them cry. They don't know what true sadness is. Make them remember that they once did." That night, you stepped under the lantern light, your hands trembling so much you nearly dropped the flute. But when the music began, all other sounds vanished. Every note, every breath was a story no one would ever hear. About the child sold away, the days bathed in cold water, the smiles that weren't real. When it ended, the room fell silent. Then applause broke out. Slow, then swelling. You bowed. Sweat trickled down your neck, mixing with the white powder, and for the first time you felt you existed. After the performance, Madame Chang summoned you. She didn't smile. Good, she said, but don't forget, we sell illusions, not emotions. You bowed. As you left, you heard her whisper to Whispering Bamboo, he could go far if he doesn't break. The Manchu young master, however, was different. He was angry. You shouldn't have looked at anyone else for that long, he said, gripping your wrist. His voice was soft as silk, but cold as steel. You smiled lightly as you had been taught. My lord, I was only performing. He released you, but his eyes still clung to you. From that day on, every time you heard his footsteps in the corridor, your stomach tightened like a thread. His affection became an invisible chain. You were no longer allowed to serve other clients, to attend performances, or to leave the room without permission. Madame Xiang was pleased, fewer complications, but you knew you had become private property, a luxurious object locked inside a house of flowers. One night, under the silver moonlight, Whispering Bamboo came by. He placed a finger to his lips, signaling silence. When I was your age, he said, I thought being loved was a reward. Then I learned it's just a subtler form of ownership. Don't let anyone think they can buy your soul. He left, leaving behind the scent of incense and a warning. You lay there, staring at the ceiling, thinking of faces, of rolls, of layers of powder, and you realized the brothel didn't just teach you how to pour tea or smile at the right moment. It taught you how to survive in a world where everything, even feelings, had a price tag. Outside, a flute played from Whispering Bamboo's room, mournful as a farewell. You closed your eyes, and for the first time you dreamed of a field of rice husks, a mother calling you her little treasure. The sigh that once belonged to her still echoed, only now it came from you. Tonight, the rain falls again. Not the fierce kind from Tang poetry, but a meticulous rain, clinging to tiles and dripping endlessly like the whisper of the dead. In the dim red glow of the lantern, you see your reflection blur in the bronze mirror, half person, half shadow, half dream. Perhaps every young man in this house has grown used to becoming a mirage, beautiful in others' eyes but quietly dissolving from within. You sit by the window, listening to Madame Xiang's footsteps in the corridor. Each click of her heels is a reminder that everything here is choreographed. The smile, the bow, even the way you breathe. Even tears have their proper timing. You suddenly remember Whispering Bamboo, who once said, we only live truthfully when the audience leaves. But the audience never leaves. They only take turns, leaving behind scents, laughter, and cold coins on the wooden table. One evening, while you were wiping the low table with a damp cloth, a young scholar walked in. Black robe, ivory fan, eyes bright with the belief that knowledge could redeem the soul. He asked if you knew the poems of Li Shangyin. You nodded. He said, what a pity. People like you were born in the wrong century. You smiled. It sounded romantic, but it was really a kind of absolution. He poured wine. You poured tea. Both of you knew the conversation was just a formality. When he touched your hand, you didn't pull away, but you felt nothing. Emotion had become a luxury in this house, used as sparingly as lamp oil. The next morning, you heard that another boy had disappeared. They said he'd been transferred, but the mattress was still indented, the comb still held a few strands of hair, and on the pillow was a smudge of red rouge not yet dry. Sometimes at night, you think you hear his footsteps in the corridor, stopping by your door, then fading away. No one asks, no one mentions it. Here, silence is the only accepted form of mourning, and so time flows like cups of tea that are endlessly refilled. Festival seasons pass beneath yellowed lights and forced laughter. Some nights you see powerful men arrive in their fine garments, speaking of morality, benevolence, and loyalty. They speak with the certainty of those who believe such virtues apply only to others. When they leave behind coins smelling of incense and a clumsy poem about beauty as fragile as dew. You smile, fold the paper, and tuck it into your sleeve. In this place, praise is merely another form of bargaining. But sometimes, rarely, there are guests who remind you that you're still human. An old merchant from the western regions once came only to hear you sing. He didn't touch you, didn't pour wine, just closed his eyes and listened. When you stopped, he said softly, "Your voice reminds me of my daughter." The words made your heart ache strangely. For a moment, you weren't an actor, just a boy singing for someone's memory of home. That night, you cried. Not from pity, but because you realized you could still be moved. And that was dangerous, because emotion could make you careless, and carelessness was what made people disappear. Another morning, when Madame Siang inspected the line, she stopped before you, her eyes sharp as a blade. "Smile less," she said. "Smile too much, and they'll think you still have hope." Then she walked away, leaving behind the scent of orchids, a fragrance that once seemed alluring, now only made you want to retch. You learned to live between two worlds, the real one, where soap and sweat are truth, and the staged one, where everything is perfumed and gilded with smiles. Standing on the balcony, looking down at the street, you see people passing, soldiers, merchants, farmers, poets. They laugh, argue, eat steaming buns, simple things you no longer know how to reach. How strange. The brothel was built to confine bodies, yet it is the mind that's truly imprisoned. Once, in a dream, you found yourself wandering outside, through misty alleys, to a small temple. The bell tolled 3 times. A monk asked your name. You opened your mouth, but no sound came out. When you awoke, you could still hear the bell, like someone else's memory lingering in your breath. Gradually, you understood that no one leaves this place whole. Some lose their pride, some their youth, and the rest, their names. You wonder, if one day you disappear like the others, will anyone remember? Will someone tell your story, or just mention it by a wrong name in a footnote of history? And then you realize, perhaps that's why you keep smiling. Because every smile, every glance, every cup of tea poured is a way to assert that you're still here, if only for a moment. You can't leave, but you can exist long enough for someone to remember. That night, as the lanterns dimmed, you stayed alone. The last light fell upon your hand, revealing traces of white powder. You rubbed it off, watching your real skin emerge beneath, warm, trembling, but alive, and you suddenly understood. Beauty isn't perfection. It's the ability to exist among the cracks. Outside, the rain still fell, and in the quiet room, amid sighs and the soft creak of a wooden fan, you found something rare, a moment of truth, brief, fragile, but enough to carry you until dawn. Tonight, you look at yourself in the bronze mirror and notice the powder sliding down your collar, revealing your real skin. The candlelight flickers, soft as a breath, but not soft enough to hide the fatigue in your eyes. People often say death is liberation, but here, aging is also a kind of death. Slow, quiet, and witnessed. Your room has been refurbished. The lanterns hang higher, the silk curtains thicker, but no one stops at the doorway to look anymore. The newcomers, young and naive, bring with them a light you've long forgotten. You teach them how to smile, how to pour wine, how to tilt their heads just enough to entice, but not enough to stir pity. They call you brother men, and you smile. The name sounds respectful, but really it's just a reminder. You've become a living past in their present. One night Lotus, the one who once mocked you, comes to you in silence. He sits down, pours tea, and says nothing. A new bruise marks his neck, and shadows linger in his eyes. You don't ask, and he doesn't explain. Both of you know that wounds in this place require no words. They only need time to fade, and if they don't, another layer of powder will do. When he stands to leave, you whisper, "Don't forget to write yourself a poem, even if it's just one line." He nods as if you've just taught him how to breathe. Promotion, a word that sounds glorious, but here it only means surviving another season. You're assigned to oversee the arts, which means making sure the younger ones don't lose the grace the clients adore. They call you master, sometimes teasing, sometimes sincere. You smile, but inside you feel hollow. They think you hold power, but your power lasts only until someone younger learns to smile exactly like you. One day, an old client returns, the official who once gave you a jade turtle. He's older now, heavier, but his eyes are the same, desire wrapped in respectability. He asks, "You're still here?" You nod. He gives a weary smile. "What a pity. Someone like you should have a home of your own." You reply, "Sir, this is my home." The answer stuns him. Then he laughs, not the laughter of joy, but of someone realizing you're both trapped in the same roles you've memorized by heart. That night, you open the wooden box hidden under your bed. Inside are scraps of paper, each with a line of poetry, a person's name, a fragment of memory. Some lines are blurred by tears, others smudged by spilled wine. But one sheet remains unfinished. It reads, "Freedom is," and stops there. You can't remember why you stopped writing. Perhaps you once believed that someday you'd understand the rest. Sometimes, when Madame Xiang is away, you sit by the window frame, gazing out at the old street. The wind drifts through the alley, carrying the smell of buns and the cries of street vendors. In the distance, children laugh, unaware that behind these walls lies another world, wrapped in velvet but starved of air. You used to wish for another chance, not for wealth, but simply to live without performing. But dreams in a brothel are the rarest luxury. One evening, as the moonlight spills through the window, you see your shadow reflected on the wall. Not the beautiful face that once drew sighs, but the figure of someone bowed over, holding a brush, writing something. You realize, perhaps freedom isn't about leaving this place, but about recording it. Not to mourn, but to exist. So that if someone ever reads it, they'll know you were once human, not just a footnote in the decadent songs of history. The next morning, as you step into the grand hall, Madame Xiang notices the small notebook in your hand. She frowns. "Writing?" she asks. You nod. "Just poetry." She studies you for a long moment, then says softly, "Be careful with things that make people remember." Then she walks away, leaving you with a strange fear that if you ever stop writing, you'll truly disappear. In the days that follow, you write more. About rain, about light, about the sound of sighs. No one reads it, but that doesn't matter. Every line is a heartbeat, proof that you once existed. You hide the notebook beneath the floorboards, between layers of rotting wood. Maybe someday, someone will find it. A scholar, a wanderer, or just the wind turning a page. And when they do, they'll read your name. Not as courtesan, servant, or commodity, but simply as a person. On the last night of the season, you paint your face lightly. No thick powder, no red lips, only real skin, real eyes, and a real smile. Lotus looks at you and asks softly, "Are you going somewhere?" You don't answer. You only say, "I just want to see what the air outside smells like." Then you walk down the corridor, where the lanterns still hang, but their light seems gentler. Outside, dawn hasn't come yet. The street is quiet, only the sound of water dripping from the roof tiles. You walk slowly, without hurry, without fear. Each step shedding layers of old powder, old roles, old gazes. When you reach the corner of the alley, you turn back. The brothel still stands, shining like a false star in the night. You bow your head slightly and smile. Perhaps freedom isn't about leaving. It's about daring to take even one step without bowing. And in that moment, as the last trace of powder fades into the mist, you are no longer them. You are you again. In the Roman world, beauty was not merely an ornament for the body, but a refined language of power. A woman did not need to speak. She only had to step onto the street wearing her palla draped correctly, her hair piled high in splendid coils, and earrings catching the light. And she had already told a story of status, virtue, and ambition. Every detail, from the fabric to the curve of a hairstyle, was encoded with social meaning, where fashion became the most delicate yet sharp weapon in a man's world. At the center of this display stood the palla, a shawl that was far more than protection against cold or sun. It was the boundary between the respectable and the despised. Noble women wore palla of purple, gold, or jade green silk imported from the East to assert their connection to a mighty empire, while middle-class women could only choose wool or coarse fabric. Every fold, every drape carried a message. When the palla was drawn over the head, it signified chastity and devotion. When left loosely over the shoulders, it could become a subtle invitation, a quiet defiance of Rome's strict moral codes. Yet beauty in Rome was never just about appearance. It was a carefully constructed art, where hair, seemingly trivial, became a measure of power. Under empresses like Julia Domna, the hair of noble women transformed into elaborate towering structures crafted over hours by teams of enslaved hairdressers known as ornatrices. A complex hairstyle meant time, and time meant power. A woman who could spend hours on her hair was clearly one who did not have to worry about bread and work. But within that pride lay a paradox. Wigs were imported from Germany, from the lands of the barbarians once conquered by Rome. Aristocratic women wore the spoils of empire on their heads, while satirists like Juvenal mocked, "Their heads are heavy with their enemies." Here, fashion was politics. Every curl was not only aesthetic but declarative. I belong to power. This became even clearer as hairstyles changed with each reign. If the empress cut her hair short, all of Rome rushed to do the same. If she wore curls across her forehead, hundreds of noblewomen lined up to imitate her. Fashion became a form of loyalty, a silent ritual without oath or ceremony. And like politics itself, those who went too far were mocked as vain or artificial. Beyond hair and fabric came jewelry, the final and most forceful language of status. A pair of pearl earrings from India, an emerald inlaid necklace, or a ring engraved with a family name, all were declarations made of metal and stone. In the flickering oil lamps of Rome, every glint from a wrist or earlobe whispered, "I belong to the upper class." Pearls were considered the queen of gems, and stories tell of Roman ladies dissolving them in wine just to prove their wealth. Pliny the Elder wrote with sarcasm, "They wear their fortunes on their bodies." But for Roman women, it was not extravagance. It was proof of existence, a way to assert worth in a society where their voices were constrained. Jewelry was also charm and belief. Amethyst warded off drunkenness, coral repelled evil, and snake-shaped bracelets symbolized rebirth. Roman women wore them not just for beauty, but for protection in a precarious world. Each gem, each piece of gold carried its own story, as seen in the tiny inscriptions on rings, a lover's name, a vow, or a secret sign. Yet behind all this splendor lay social control. A woman could be harshly judged for wearing her palla the wrong way or styling her hair too lavishly. Roman moralists saw it as a sign of corruption. From virtue to fashion, everything was dictated by men. Even when women were praised as goddesses of beauty, that beauty had to conform to accepted boundaries. Ironically, those very boundaries taught Roman women the art of expression through silence. When they could not speak, they spoke through fabric, gemstones, and hair. A tilt of the head, a fold in the palla, a stray lock across the forehead, all could be whispers of rebellion or quiet sorrow. They could not seize power, but they could command attention. They could not speak, but they could make others remember. In surviving statues, one sees women with distant gazes, intricate hairstyles, and jeweled necks, faces carved in cold marble yet radiating vitality. They were not mere decorations of history. They were women who used their own bodies to inscribe their place in Roman civilization. Today, when we look back, we see that Roman fashion was never just about beauty. It was a complex social language, where every thread, every curl, every stone bore the weight of power and dignity. It stands as proof that even in a male-dominated world, women found ways to exist, to assert themselves, quietly, yet never disappearing. And perhaps when a Roman lady finally removed her palla, revealing her real hair and skin, she was not just shedding a social shell, she was reclaiming herself. Because beauty, after all, is not what one wears, but what remains when all the splendor fades. As the middle class gradually defined its own identity, fashion in Roman society was no longer merely a luxury of the elite, but became a refined language to express power, morality, and social aspiration. Every piece of fabric, every hairpin or necklace carried within it layers of meaning far beyond surface beauty. They were silent declarations of a woman's status and dignity. Women of this class often had to walk a fine line between propriety and personal desire. They were not allowed to dress too extravagantly for fear of being seen as showy, yet could not be too plain lest they lose the respect of their community. In marble-floored houses or along streets shaded by columns, the sight of women wearing perfectly fitted stolae, lightly cinched at the waist with silk sashes, their hair neatly tied but adorned with a small golden pin, that was the perfect balance between virtue and style. Roman poets such as Ovid and Juvenal often captured this contradiction. In their verses, Roman women were both praised for their purity and virtue, and mocked if they dared to cross the boundaries of what was considered proper fashion. Yet from within those constraints, a new form of freedom was born. Freedom through subtlety. When women could not openly challenge the system, they learned to convey their thoughts through every thread and layer of cloth. A dress dyed in a faint purple hue, a color reserved for royalty, could be a way for a magistrate's wife to discreetly express pride in her husband's position. A thin scarf gently draped over the shoulder could symbolize loneliness or concealed pride. Such small details, when placed in the ritualistic context of Roman society, turned fashion into a secret language understood only by those of the same class. It was not only clothing, jewelry too spoke its own language of class. A woman wearing too much gold and silver was seen as frivolous, but if she wore none at all, people suspected poverty or decline. Thus, their art lay in the balance of just enough, enough to say they held status, but not so much as to cross the line of modesty. This just enough became a hallmark of Roman aesthetics, luxurious yet not ostentatious, refined yet full of authority. From a modern perspective, these standards may seem restrictive, but for Roman women, they were strategies of survival in a society where family honor was bound to how they dressed and behaved. In a world where power belonged to men, they found their own kind of power, the power of appearance, of first impressions, of beauty calibrated to both obey and subtly defy. And when the setting sun cast its glow on the ancient stone walls, you can imagine a Roman woman standing by her window, her hand gently brushing the soft fabric. She was not merely choosing an outfit, she was choosing how the world would see her. From the noble women draped in soft silk to the slaves allowed only coarse tunics, Roman fashion reflected the entire power structure of the empire, a society where fabric, color, and hairstyle became symbols of status and morality. Yet behind these garments lay more than aesthetics. They were an unending negotiation between freedom and restraint, between personal desire and social convention. The wives of merchants, artisans, or soldiers, though unable to afford luxury, still displayed dignity through small details: a cleanly washed wool shawl, neatly braided hair, or carefully mended shoes. In a society where appearance was a measure of virtue, neatness became their way of asserting self-respect. For them, dressing was not about attracting attention, but about proving that even in modesty, they preserved their dignity. By contrast, at the lowest rung, enslaved women and prostitutes were stripped of the right to define themselves. They were forced to wear clothes that said nothing but their condition. The tunics of slaves lacked fine cuts and personal color, mere tools for covering the body and serving labor. For prostitutes, the law even used fashion as punishment. They were forbidden to wear tunics, making their bodies a public sign of shame. While noble women used dress to display virtue, these women were forced to wear their stigma. Yet perhaps it was precisely this rigid control that made fashion a mirror of Roman power. The lavish lex sumptuaria laws drew strict lines over who could wear what colors, fabrics, or jewels. Every thread of silk and every gem was regulated by the state. Though often ignored by the elite, these rules underscored one truth: fashion was not freedom. It was a symbol of order. Each garment was a declaration of class, a social map meticulously sewn onto the human body. Roman women, no matter their class, lived in a world where beauty was politicized. They could not speak in the Senate, but they were allowed and required to speak through their garments. In every fold of wool and glint of gold or silver, they wove stories of honor, loyalty, and longing for recognition. Their bodies, unintentionally, became the stage for dialogues of power. Empresses like Livia and Julia Domna understood this better than anyone. When Livia chose to wear plain white garments, she was not merely expressing chastity. She was shaping the moral image of Augustus's reign, a revival of Roman virtue after years of civil war. Julia Domna, conversely, turned her elaborate curls into imperial symbols, her image replicated on thousands of statues across the empire. Each lock of her hair was a political message, imitated by countless women as silent acts of loyalty. From that, fashion became a powerful tool of propaganda. Noble women recreated the empress's style to show devotion, while lower classes imitated them to assert that they too belonged to Rome's civilized world. A subtle hierarchy was maintained, not by force, but by fabric. During religious ceremonies, veils of fine gauze expressed reverence. At banquets, shades of red or gold shimmered with prosperity. Every choice was calculated, every piece of cloth a political stance. Roman fashion thus functioned as a complex symbolic language. Between two extremes, virtue and luxury, women balanced precariously. Too plain, and they were seen as disrespectful to tradition. Too lavish, and they became emblems of moral decay. Moralists like Seneca and Juvenal seized on this tension to condemn silken women, turning them into scapegoats for the empire's moral decline. Yet such criticism only proved the true influence of women in shaping the empire's image. As trade expanded, Rome not only exported power but imported beauty. Purple dyes from Tyre, linen from Egypt, jewels from India, all were redefined within Roman aesthetics. A woman draped in foreign silk did not merely show wealth, she wore upon her body the map of Roman dominion, an empire that spanned the world. In every thread lay the Silk Road, in every gemstone the shadow of merchants crossing deserts. And as dusk fell over the forum, one could imagine a Roman woman walking through the crowd, her cloak fluttering in the breeze, hand lifting her hem to avoid the dusty street. Outwardly, she was just a wife, a mother, but in that stillness she was performing her role in a grand drama, the drama of empire, of honor, of power, and of beauty. Fashion in the end was what bound everyone in Rome, from empress to slave, from soldier to courtesan. It was both shackle and language, and in every stitch, every fold, every glimmer of light, Roman history continues to be woven, not only with blood and stone, but with silk, wool, and the pride of the women who lived in the empire's shadow, yet were never forgotten. The winter night in Edo in 1702 was steeped in silence. Snow blanketed the tiled roofs and streets, the cold moonlight shining down upon the narrow alleys where samurai once walked. In that stillness, 47 men quietly gathered under the command of Oishi Kuranosuke. After 2 years of humiliation and disguise, the moment they had awaited had finally arrived. No cheers, no songs of praise, only silence and determination, as if even the heavens were holding their breath, waiting for justice to be fulfilled. Oishi looked at each face around him, men who had given up public honor to preserve true honor. They were no longer retainers of Asano, but symbols of eternal loyalty. In a temporary house, he spread out the map of Kira's mansion before them, his calm voice resonating through the still air. Tonight, we are not avengers. We are those who bring justice to our master. As the night turned to the third watch, the Ronin divided into 2 groups, one to attack the main gate, the other to surround the back. Beneath the snow, they moved like shadows. Though forbidden to fight in the name of the shogunate, every step they took bore the weight of Bushido, loyalty, honor, and death. Their swords were drawn not for glory, but to fulfill a promise engraved in their hearts. The first crash of breaking doors tore apart the false peace that had cloaked Kira's mansion. Cries of panic, the clash of blades, and the crunch of snow beneath feet merged into a fierce symphony. The Ronin advanced through each chamber, searching for the man who had caused their lord's disgraceful death. None retreated, none hesitated. Kira's guards, though many, were swiftly overcome by the strength of unwavering loyalty. Kira Yoshinaka, who had believed that time and prestige would protect him, fled in terror to a storage house at the rear. When Oishi found him, Kira trembled, his face pale under the torchlight. Oishi did not kill him immediately. He carefully asked, "Are you truly Kira Yoshinaka, the man who drove Asano Takumi no Kami to die in shame?" When Kira remained silent, Oishi placed before him the very sword Asano had once used in his failed attack. "If you truly possess honor, use this sword to die." But Kira only shook, wordless. At last, Oishi signaled one of his men to end it. Kira's death brought no triumph, only the close of a long, patient, and painful journey. The Ronin washed his head clean, wrapped it carefully, and left the mansion in order. No looting, no killing of innocents. As dawn broke, they carried Kira's head to Asano's grave at Sengakuji Temple. They knelt, offered their tribute, and placed the enemy's head before their master's tomb. The scene, though simple, echoed through history as one of the most solemn moments of samurai spirit. Having fulfilled their duty, they knew their fate was sealed. The shogunate could not allow such an act of personal vengeance to pass, even though all knew it was done for honor. When arrested, none resisted. They appeared before the court calm and serene, like men who had already attained peace. The shogunate officials faced a paradox. To punish them as criminals would anger the people. To pardon them would weaken the law. Finally, a verdict was delivered. The 47 Ronin were granted the right to die by seppuku, the samurai's ritual suicide, instead of execution. It was the government's way of acknowledging their honor, even while killing them to preserve order. On the day of execution, the air was as still as that snowy morning 2 years before. The men, dressed in white, heads shaven, knelt in a circle of silence. Oishi was the first to perform the ritual, his gaze tranquil, as though death were merely the final act of loyalty. As he plunged the blade into his abdomen and his attendant struck off his head, the other Ronin followed one by one. No one wept. They had lived and died in the true spirit of Bushido. Later, the people of Edo flocked to Sengakuji Temple to visit the graves of the 47 Ronin. They mourned them not only as warriors, but honored them as symbols of a value beyond law and power, loyalty and honor. Centuries later, their story is still told, not merely as tragedy, but as a song of faith and devotion. Standing before those snow-covered graves, one can almost feel the breath of men who dared to give up everything to keep a promise. And though history may fade with time, the tale of the 47 Ronin endures as proof that, sometimes, in silence and patience, humanity finds its highest form of loyalty.